The rifle range at Fort Bragg existed in a permanent state of controlled violence. The air tasted of copper and cordite, a metallic cocktail that settled on the tongue like communion wine for warriors. At 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning in late September, the sun had just begun to crack the horizon, painting the North Carolina sky in shades of bruised purple and arterial red. Captain Jordan Kade stood at the 500-yard line, her boots planted shoulder-width apart in the red clay that had drunk the sweat of 1,000 soldiers before her. She wore standard Army combat uniform fatigues, the sleeves rolled tight above her elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and a roadmap of scars that told stories she never spoke aloud. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, so severe it could have been drawn with a ruler. At 29 years old, she carried herself with the fluid economy of movement that separated true operators from the merely competent. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system rested against her shoulder like it had grown there. 7 pounds of cold steel and polymer that had become an extension of her nervous system through 10,000 repetitions. She controlled her breathing, 4 counts in through the nose, hold for 2, 6 counts out through the mouth. The morning air was cool enough to see her breath, small ghosts that dissipated into nothing. Downrange, 10 silhouette targets stood at varying distances, 500 yards, 600, 700, 800. The final target, a man-sized steel plate, waited at 1,000 yards, a distance where wind drift and bullet drop turned marksmanship into applied mathematics and faith. The range officer, a grizzled sergeant first class named Holloway with 3 combat tours and a face like tan leather, stood 15 feet behind her with a stopwatch and a clipboard. He had seen a lot of shooters in his 26 years of service. He had seen snipers who could make impossible shots when they had all day to calculate. He had seen amateur enthusiasts who confused video game skills with reality. And he had seen Jordan Kade. She made him uncomfortable, and he could not quite articulate why. Maybe it was the stillness, the way she could stand at the firing line for 3 full minutes without shifting her weight, without adjusting her grip, without the small nervous tells that betrayed every other human being under observation. Or maybe it was the scar. The burn mark wrapped around the right side of her neck like a strangler's handprint. The skin puckered and discolored, a shade darker than the rest of her complexion. It started just below her ear and disappeared beneath the high collar of her uniform. Holloway did not know the story. Nobody on base did. Jordan Kade did not tell stories. She just shot. "Fire when ready," Holloway called out, his voice flat and professional. Jordan did not acknowledge the command. She was already in the zone, that psychological space where the world narrowed to a tunnel of perfect clarity. She saw the wind flags at 300 yards, hanging limp in the still morning air. She saw the mirage rising from the berm behind the targets, heat shimmer that would intensify as the sun climbed higher. She calculated the density altitude, the barometric pressure, the Coriolis effect that would drift her bullet slightly right over extreme distance. The first shot was a gift. 500 yards, no wind, a target the size of a man's chest. She squeezed the trigger with the smooth, deliberate pressure of closing a hand around a lover's. The rifle barked, a sharp crack that echoed off the berms and tree line. Downrange, the target snapped backward on its hinge, a perfect center mass hit. She cycled the bolt, bam, ejecting the spent casing in a glittering arc of brass. It hit the concrete pad with a musical ping and rolled away. She did not watch it fall. She was already acquiring the next target. 600 yards. Slight crosswind from the left, maybe 3 miles per hour. She held the reticle 1 mil dot to the right of center and pressed the trigger. The target fell. 700 yards. The wind had picked up, a steady 4 mile per hour push. She adjusted, fired, watched the steel react to the impact like it had been kicked by an invisible boot. 800 yards. This was where most shooters started to struggle, where the cumulative effects of distance and wind and bullet drop turned shooting into guesswork. Jordan did not guess. She calculated, fired, hit. 900 yards, the far edge of effective range for most military snipers. The target was a dark smudge against the distant berm. She focused on her breathing, slowing her heart rate from its resting 50 beats per minute down to 45. In the space between heartbeats, the rifle was perfectly still. She fired. The sound of the impact was delayed, a half-second gap between the shot and the distant clang of lead meeting steel. The target dropped. Holloway checked his stopwatch. 4 targets, 4 hits, elapsed time 90 seconds. He made a note on his clipboard. He had seen Olympic shooters take longer. 1 target remained. 1,000 yards, just over half a mile. At this distance, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 2 full seconds. In that time, gravity would pull the round down 60 feet. The wind, now gusting to 6 miles per hour, could push it 3 feet left or right. The curvature of the Earth became a factor, the Coriolis force imparted by the planet's rotation adding another 6 inches of drift to the east. Jordan Kade stared downrange at the final steel plate. It was smaller than the others, a precise 12-inch circle. At 1,000 yards, it occupied a space in her scope smaller than a dime held at arm's length. She thought about her father, Colonel James Kade, United States Army Special Forces. Missing in action, Laos, December 4th, 1972. Presumed killed in action. Body never recovered. Dog tags never found. A name on a memorial wheel in Washington, D.C., one among thousands of ghosts who walked into the jungle and never came home. Jordan had been 6 months old when he disappeared. Too young to remember his face, his voice, the way he smelled like Old Spice and gun oil. Everything she knew about him came from photographs and her mother's stories. Memories polished smooth by repetition until they took on the quality of myths. James Kade was a hero, her mother always said. James Kade was brave. James Kade never quit. Margaret Ann Kade had believed her husband would come home right up until the day she died. Breast cancer, stage 4, 1995. Jordan had been 18, fresh out of high school, sitting in a hospice room that smelled of disinfectant and approaching death. Her mother's last words, whispered with a throat ravaged by chemotherapy, were not for her daughter. They were for a ghost. "Tell your father I waited. Tell him I never stopped believing." Jordan had enlisted in the Army 30 days after the funeral. Not because she believed in the mission or the flag or any of the rhetoric that recruiting commercials sold. She enlisted because it was the only way she knew to touch the ghost of a father she had never met. If she could not have him, she could become him. 12 years later, she stood at a firing line in North Carolina, staring at a steel target 1,000 yards away. She had become everything her father had been: airborne qualified, Ranger qualified, Special Forces assessment and selection qualified, sniper qualified, designated marksman, close quarters, battle instructor. She had killed 47 enemy combatants in 3 combat deployments: Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. She had bled on 4 continents. She had stared death in the face and death had blinked first. But she had never found him. Jordan exhaled slowly, emptying her lungs until there was nothing left, until she was hollow and still. She placed the crosshair on the center of the distant steel plate. She did not calculate the wind. She felt it, the way sailors felt the sea, an intuition born of 10,000 repetitions. She applied 3 pounds of pressure to a trigger with a 3.5-pound brake. The rifle fired. The world held its breath. 1.3 seconds later, the steel plate rang like a church bell. Dead center. Holloway stared at his stopwatch, then at the target, then at Jordan. He had been running qualification shoots for 8 years. He had never seen a coal bore 5 for 5 at extreme range with a time under 2 minutes. "Perfect score, Captain," he said, and his voice carried a note of something that might have been respect or might have been fear. He could not tell the difference anymore. Jordan cleared her weapon, locking the bolt to the rear and visually confirming the chamber was empty. She safed the rifle, slung it across her back, and turned to walk off the range. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. Perfect scores were not accomplishments. They were expectations. As she passed Holloway, he called out to her, "Captain Kade, you have a visitor. CID courier waiting at the armory. Says it is urgent." Jordan stopped walking. The Criminal Investigation Division did not send couriers for routine business. She nodded once and changed direction, her boots crunching on gravel as she headed toward the low brick building that housed the armory and administrative offices. The courier was a young specialist, barely old enough to shave, wearing Class A dress uniform and carrying a locked aluminum briefcase chained to his wrist like a fashion accessory from a spy movie. He snapped to attention when Jordan approached, his salute sharp enough to cut. "Captain Kade, I have a classified delivery for you, ma'am. I need to see two forms of ID and confirm your security clearance level. Jordan produced her military ID and her CAC card, the common access card that served as both identification and digital key to the Department of Defense network. The courier scanned both cards through a portable reader, waited for the green light, and unlocked the briefcase with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. Inside was a single manila envelope, letter-sized, sealed with red evidence tape, and marked with classification stamps. Top secret, special compartmented information. Eyes only. And below that, in neat block letters, Captain J. Kade, SF, USA. Sign here, ma'am, the courier said, producing a digital tablet. Jordan scrawled her signature across the screen with a stylus. The courier nodded, closed the empty briefcase, and left without another word. Jordan stood alone in the armory parking lot, holding an envelope that weighed perhaps 4 ounces, but felt heavy as a tombstone. She knew what it was before she opened it. She had filed a Freedom of Information Act request 18 months ago, petitioning for the declassification of documents related to Operation Fractured Jaw, a covert mission conducted in Laos during the final years of American involvement in Southeast Asia. The request had been denied, then appealed, then denied again, then appealed to a higher authority, bouncing up the chain of command through layers of bureaucracy until it landed on the desk of someone with enough rank and clearance to make a decision. Apparently, someone had decided yes. Jordan walked to her truck, a battered Ford F-150 with 200,000 miles and a faded Army Strong bumper sticker peeling at the corners. She climbed into the cab, closed the door, and sat in silence for a long moment before breaking the evidence seal. The envelope contained 47 pages of photocopied documents, mission reports, intelligence assessments, signal intercepts, and after-action reviews. Most of it was heavily redacted, black bars obscuring names and locations, and operational details that remained classified even after 50 years. But enough remained visible to tell a story. Operation Fractured Jaw, December 1972. Objective was to interdict a supply route running through Laos, part of a vast logistical network supporting enemy forces. A 12-man Special Forces A-team, augmented by CIA paramilitary officers and indigenous fighters, inserted via helicopter into a remote valley along the border. The mission was supposed to last 72 hours, set demolitions, collapse a bridge, extract via the same LZ. It went wrong on day 2. Radio intercepts suggested the team had been compromised, either through signals, intelligence, or human betrayal. An enemy regiment, reinforced by Soviet advisors, surrounded the American position. A firefight erupted. The team called for air support, for extraction, for anything. But the weather had turned, a tropical storm grounding all aircraft. They were alone. The last radio transmission came from the team leader, a captain with 11 years of service and 2 previous tours. The audio file was not included in the documents, but the transcript was there, preserved in faded typewriter font on yellowing paper. Fractured jaw actual to any station. We are compromised. Heavy contact. 3 friendly KIA, 4 friendly YA. Request immediate extract. Negative on air support due to weather. We are displacing to alternate LZ coordinates follows. And then, handwritten in the margin by some long-dead intelligence analyst, a note, intercept lost. No further comms received. Team declared MIA. Jordan read the name of the team leader, typed at the bottom of the report. Captain James Kade. Her hands began to shake. She flipped through more pages, scanning reports filed in the weeks and months after the team's disappearance. Search and rescue operations, limited by political constraints and deteriorating security conditions, had found evidence of a firefight at the primary LZ. Blood, shell casings, shredded equipment, but no bodies, no dog tags, no confirmation. The Army declared all 12 men missing in action, then 6 months later upgraded the status to presumed killed in action, body not recovered. James Kade's name was added to the National Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., panel 01W, line 127. But Jordan kept reading, and in the final pages, buried beneath layers of redaction, she found something that stopped her heart. A CIA intelligence report dated March 1973, 3 months after the team's disappearance. The source was an enemy defector, a former officer seeking asylum in Thailand. During his debriefing, he mentioned American prisoners being transferred through Laos toward interrogation centers, or in some cases, onward to the Soviet Union for specialized exploitation. One prisoner stood out in the defector's memory. An American Special Forces officer, badly wounded but alive, being transported in a truck convoy. The officer was separated from the other prisoners, guarded by Soviet advisors rather than local forces. The defector remembered this because the American fought back even with his hands bound, headbutting a guard and breaking the man's nose before being beaten unconscious. The defector had seen the American's uniform briefly when guards stripped him for medical treatment. He remembered details: a green beret, captain's bars, and dog tags. The defector could not read English, but he remembered the name started with the letter K. When shown photographs during debriefing, he identified the prisoner with 70% certainty. The photograph was not included in the declassified documents, but Jordan did not need to see it. She knew which face he had pointed to. The CIA report concluded with an assessment. Subject likely transferred to Soviet custody for interrogation, Special Operations Tactics and Signal Intelligence. Probability of survival, past 6 months assessed as low. Probability of repatriation assessed as 0. Recommend no further action. No further action. Her father had been alive, wounded, captured, but alive. And the United States government had known. And they had done nothing. They had declared him dead, carved his name into a wall, and moved on. Jordan sat in her truck and felt something break open inside her chest. A wound that had been sealed over with scar tissue for 29 years. It was not grief. Grief implied loss, and you could not lose something you never had. This was rage. Cold, surgical, absolute rage. She flipped to the final page of the document stack. It was a recent addendum, dated just 6 weeks ago, a DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, assessment based on newly acquired signals, intelligence. Russian language intercepts from Wagner Group communications in Afghanistan mentioned a consultant, a former KGB officer with extensive experience in Southeast Asia counterinsurgency operations during the Cold War. The officer's name was Colonel Dmitry Volkov, age 58, currently operating in Kunar province as an advisor to anti-coalition forces. A footnote at the bottom of the page, almost invisible, cross-referenced Volkov to historical records. In 1972, then-Lieutenant Volkov had been assigned as a Soviet advisor to forces in Laos. His area of operations included the region where Operation Fracture Jaw had been compromised. Jordan Kade stared at that name. Dmitry Volkov, the man who had been there when her father disappeared. The man who might have been there when her father was captured. The man who might know what happened in those final hours before James Kade vanished into the black hole of Soviet prisons and never came home. And now that man was in Afghanistan, in Kunar province, in her operational area. Jordan pulled out her secure phone and dialed a number she had committed to memory but never called. It rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, crisp and professional. DI Operations. How may I direct your call? Captain Jordan Kade, Special Forces, Fort Bragg. I need to speak with someone about a Wagner Group target in Afghanistan. Colonel Dmitry Volkov. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking on a keyboard. Please hold, Captain. The line went silent for 30 seconds. Then a different voice came on. Male, older, with the flat affect of a career intelligence officer who had forgotten how to inflect emotion. Captain Kade, this is Deputy Director Osborne. I understand you have questions about one of our current intelligence priorities. Sir, I just received declassified documents related to Operation Fracture Jaw. I see that Colonel Volkov was operating in the same area at the time of my father's disappearance. I want to know if there is any additional intelligence linking him to the capture or transfer of American POWs. Another pause, longer this time. Captain, what I am about to tell you is classified. You have the clearance to hear it, but you cannot discuss it outside of secure channels. Understood? Understood, sir. We have human intelligence from a source inside Wagner Group operations. The source reports that Colonel Volkov keeps personal effects from his operational history. Trophies. Among those items are dog tags from American service members killed or captured during his time in Southeast Asia. We do not have confirmation of which tags or how many, but the source is considered reliable. Jordan's hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles went white. Sir, is there an active operation targeting Volkov? There is. JSOC has a mission plan to capture or kill Volkov within the next 72 hours. A SEAL team is being tasked for direct action. The operation is classified at the TS-SCI level. Jordan took a breath. Her voice, when she spoke, was perfectly calm. Sir, I am requesting assignment to that operation as a tactical augment. I have current clearances, I have operational experience in theater, and I have personal knowledge that may be relevant to the intelligence exploitation phase. Captain Kade, with respect, this is not a revenge mission. This is a strategic priority. Sir, with respect, I am not interested in revenge. I am interested in closure. If my father's dog tags are in Volkov's possession, they belong to my family. And if there is any possibility at all, that Volkov has information about what happened to the 12 Americans who disappeared in Laos 50 years ago, then I need to be there when he is captured. The line went silent for so long that Jordan thought the connection had dropped. Then Osborne spoke, his voice softer, almost human. I will make a call, Captain. No promises, but I will make a call. Thank you, sir. Jordan hung up and sat in the cab of her truck, surrounded by documents that proved her entire life had been built on a lie. Her father had not died a hero's death in the jungle. He had been taken. And the people who should have moved heaven and earth to bring him home had instead written him off as a statistic and moved on. She looked down at her hands. They were steady now, no tremor, no shake. The rage had not dissipated. It had crystallized into something harder and colder. Purpose. Jordan Kade started the truck and drove home to pack. 18 hours later, she was on a C-17 Globemaster transport aircraft flying east across the Atlantic. The cargo bay was cavernous and freezing, filled with pallets of supplies and a dozen soldiers sleeping in web seats or sprawled on top of equipment. Jordan sat alone near the rear ramp, her assault pack between her boots, her rifle case secured to the deck with cargo straps. She did not sleep. She watched the red cargo lights and thought about Syria. 18 months ago, she had been attached to a CIA paramilitary unit conducting direct action missions against Islamic State targets in the Aleppo countryside. The operation had been going well, a series of successful raids that degraded enemy command structure and disrupted their logistics. Then, intelligence identified a high-value target, an ISIS commander responsible for coordinating foreign fighter networks. The target was holed up in a fortified compound on the outskirts of the city. Jordan's team had gone in at night, fast roping from helicopters into a courtyard that should have been clear. Instead, they dropped into an ambush. The ISIS fighters had been waiting, dug in with heavy machine guns and RPGs. The team took casualties immediately. Jordan's helicopter took an RPG hit to the tail rotor and went down hard, slamming into a building and erupting in flames. Jordan had been thrown clear, her body armor absorbing the impact but her rifle shattering against a concrete wall. She came to consciousness, surrounded by fire and screaming. 3 of her teammates were trapped inside the burning helicopter. She could hear them calling for help, their voices high and thin with panic as the fuel ignited and the interior became an oven. Jordan tried to reach them. She got within 10 feet before the heat drove her back, blistering the exposed skin on her neck and face. She tried again, wrapping her head in a jacket soaked with water from a puddle. She got within 5 feet before a secondary explosion threw her backward, slamming her into a wall hard enough to crack 2 ribs. When she woke up, she was in a Turkish hospital. The 3 men in the helicopter had burned to death. Jordan had 2nd and 3rd degree burns, covering the right side of her neck and part of her jaw. The doctors told her she was lucky. She would keep her ear. She would keep her eye. The scarring would be significant but not disfiguring. Jordan did not feel lucky. She felt like a coward. She had run from the fire. She had let her teammates die. The army did not see it that way. They saw a soldier who had tried to rescue her team despite impossible odds, who had been injured in the attempt, who had survived against the probability. They gave her a Bronze Star for valor and sent her to physical therapy. Jordan never told anyone the truth, that in those final moments before the explosion, when the heat became unbearable and her body screamed at her to retreat, she had made a choice. She had chosen to save herself instead of dying with her team, and she had been living with that choice ever since, carrying it like a stone in her chest, feeling it every time she touched the scar on her neck. The scar was not a badge of honor. It was a brand, a permanent reminder that when the moment came, when she had to choose between the mission and her own survival, she had chosen wrong. The C-17 hit turbulence, bucking in the night sky over the Mediterranean. Jordan braced herself against the cargo netting and closed her eyes. She thought about her father, wounded and captured, dragged away to some Soviet prison where he probably died alone and forgotten. She thought about the men who had burned in Syria, their last moments filled with terror and pain. And she thought about Dmitry Volkov, the ghost from her father's past, the man who might have answers, the man who kept trophies from the people he had killed or captured. Jordan Kade had spent 29 years trying to touch the ghost of her father. Now, for the first time, she had a target, a name, a location, a mission. She was not going to Afghanistan for the army, or for the flag, or for any abstract concept of duty. She was going for the only thing that mattered, the truth. And if she had to burn the whole valley to get it, then she would light the match herself. The aircraft banked east, chasing the dawn. Forward Operating Base Bravo squatted in the mountains of Kunar province like a wound that refused to heal. Concertina wire, HESCO barriers filled with rock and sand, guard towers built from shipping containers and sandbags. The whole installation smelled of diesel fuel, burning trash, and the particular variety of boredom that came from waiting for violence in a place where violence was the only certainty. Captain Jordan Kade stepped off the Chinook helicopter into a wall of heat that hit like a physical blow. The afternoon sun turned the sky white, bleaching color from the mountains until everything looked like an overexposed photograph. She shouldered her assault pack, grabbed her rifle case, and walked across the landing zone through rotor wash that kicked up dust fine as talcum powder. The base was small, maybe 200 personnel, mostly support troops with a rotating cast of special operations teams passing through on their way to missions in the valleys below. Jordan had been to a dozen bases just like it across 3 deployments. They all had the same architecture of temporary permanence, the same rhythm of guard shifts and chow hall rotations, and the endless drone of generators that never quite drowned out the silence of mountains that had been killing outsiders for thousands of years. She checked in at the Tactical Operations Center, a plywood structure reinforced with sandbags and satellite dishes. A bored-looking staff sergeant with a Kentucky drawl processed her paperwork, assigned her a bunk in the transient barracks, and told her to report to the SEAL team compound at 1800 hours for mission brief. Jordan had 4 hours to kill. She dropped her gear at the barracks, a tin box divided into 8 bunks that smelled of mildew and the accumulated sweat of men who had passed through and moved on. She claimed an empty rack in the back corner, stowed her pack in the wall locker, and headed to the gym. The gym was a plywood shack with a corrugated metal roof and a collection of weights that looked like they had been salvaged from a junkyard. The floor was covered in rubber mats that had absorbed so much sweat and dirt they had turned permanently black. A single fan pushed hot air in lazy circles. Jordan changed into PT gear, Army-issue shorts, and a gray shirt with her last name stenciled across the back in faded black letters. She approached the bench press, loaded 2 45-pound plates on each side of the bar, lay down, and started her warm-up set. She was on her 3rd rep when the door opened and 3 men walked in. They moved with the fluid confidence of apex predators, the kind of casual arrogance that came from being the most dangerous thing in any room they entered. Navy SEALs. Jordan knew the walk before she saw the uniforms. The first man through the door was enormous, 6'4" and built like a linebacker, who had decided to specialize in controlled violence. African-American, maybe 40 years old, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples and forearms thick as anchor chain. He wore a faded brown t-shirt with Team 7 stenciled across the chest and shorts that showed legs corded with muscle. Behind him came a younger man, mid-20s, Hispanic, lean and compact with the kind of wiry build that suggested speed over power. He had the face of someone who smiled easily, but eyes that stayed cold and calculating. The third man was older, mid-40s, with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in the sun and salt air. He had the kind of face that belonged on a recruiting poster, square-jawed and serious, with lines around his eyes that came from squinting at distant horizons. The big man saw Jordan first. He stopped, looked at her, then at the weight she was pressing. 225. Not impressive for a man his size, but for a woman barely 5'7", it was enough to make him pause. He walked over, his boots heavy on the rubber mats, and stood at the head of the bench where a spotter would stand. Jordan completed her rep, racked the bar, and sat up. "You must be the attachment," the big man said. His voice was deep, a rumble that came from somewhere around his chest cavity. "Captain Jordan Kade," she said. She did not offer her hand. She was covered in sweat, and she did not believe in fake courtesy. "Master Chief Roy Cunningham," the big man said. "Call sign Sledge. This is Petty Officer Torres." He nodded at the younger Hispanic man and Lieutenant Commander Marcus Briggs. The older man stepped forward, Briggs had the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself. He was the ranking officer in the room and everyone knew it without him saying a word. Captain, welcome to FOB Bravo. I understand you have a personal interest in our target. Jordan stood up, meeting Briggs eye to eye. She was tall for a woman, but he still had 3 inches on her. I have information that may be relevant to the intelligence exploitation phase, sir. My father was captured by Soviet forces in Laos in 1972. There is reason to believe Colonel Volkov was present at the capture and may have kept personal effects from American POWs. Briggs studied her face, his eyes moving to the burn scar on her neck, then back to her eyes. I read your file, Captain. Impressive record. Ranger qualified, sniper qualified, 3 combat deployments. Bronze Star for Valor in Syria. You are more than qualified for this operation. But I need to know if you can follow orders when those orders might conflict with your personal objective. Jordan met his gaze without flinching. Sir, my objective is to capture Volkov alive so that he can be properly interrogated. If my father's dog tags are in his possession, I want them recovered. But I will not compromise the mission or endanger your team to pursue a personal vendetta. You have my word. Briggs nodded slowly. He had commanded men in combat for 20 years. He knew how to read people, how to separate those who talk tough from those who were tough. Jordan Kade did not talk much at all, and that told him more than any speech. Good. Brief is at 1800. Be ready to roll by 2200. We insert via helo, movement to target on foot, hit the compound at 0300 local. In and out before sunrise. Understood, sir. Briggs turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Captain. My daughter is about your age, 26. She is in medical school back in San Diego. Every time I deploy, I wonder if I am going to make it back to see her graduate. When I look at you, I see her. So understand that if you are on my team, I will do everything in my power to bring you home. But I also expect you to do your job. We clear? Crystal clear, sir. Briggs left, Torres following behind him. Sledge remained, his massive arms crossed over his chest, studying Jordan with an expression that was hard to read. My granddaddy was a Tuskegee airman, Sledge said after a long silence. First black aviators in the Army Air Corps. They told him he could not fly because of the color of his skin. He flew anyway. Shot down 3 German fighters over Italy, came home, and they still would not let him drink from the same water fountain as a white man. Jordan waited. She had learned that when someone like Sledge started a story, it went somewhere. Granddaddy taught me that you do not earn respect by asking for it. You earn it by being so damn good that people have no choice but to give it to you. He wiped his hands on a towel hanging from the weight rack. You understand what I am saying? I understand, Master Chief. Good. Sledge walked to the door, then turned back. Let me see you shoot before I decide if I trust you to cover my 6. Jordan allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile. Name the time and distance, Master Chief. Sledge grinned, a flash of white teeth in a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. 1900. 500 yards. Do not be late. He left, and Jordan was alone in the gym again. She lay back down on the bench, gripped the bar, and started another set. The weight felt light. Everything felt light compared to what she was carrying. At 1900 hours, Jordan stood at the firing range on the eastern edge of the Phobie. It was a rudimentary setup, just a berm of bulldozed dirt with target frames at various distances. The sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if this was the kind of place where anyone had time to notice beauty. Sledge was already there, along with Torres and 2 other SEALs Jordan had not met yet. One was a corpsman, a medic, late 30s with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen every way the human body could break and had learned to fix most of them. The other was younger, early 20s, with radio equipment strapped to his chest and the nervous energy of someone who had not been doing this long enough to be bored by it. The corpsman introduced himself as Senior Chief Hayes, call sign Doc. The radio man was Petty Officer Rivera, call sign Comms. Captain Kade, Sledge said, gesturing to him the range. Standard qual course. 5 targets at 500 yards. You get 1 magazine, 20 rounds. We will see how Army snipers stack up against the real deal. Torres snorted. Master Chief, be nice. She might actually be good. Jordan ignored the banner. She had heard variations of it her entire career, the low-key hazing that came with being a woman in a male-dominated profession. It used to bother her. Now it was just noise. She approached the firing line, dropped her pack, and withdrew her M110 rifle from its case. She assembled it with practiced efficiency, mounted the scope, loaded a magazine, and settled into a prone position behind the weapon. The targets were steel plates, 12 inches in diameter, arranged at 500-yard intervals. The wind was gusting maybe 5 miles per hour from the west, pushing crossways across her line of fire. The light was fading fast, that golden hour before dusk when shadows grew long and depth perception became tricky. Jordan controlled her breathing. 4 counts in, hold for 2, 6 counts out. Her heart rate dropped from 70 beats per minute to 50. The rifle became an extension of her skeleton, perfectly aligned with her spine. She fired 5 shots in 12 seconds. 5 steel plates rang out in succession, each impact arriving with the delayed clang of supersonic lead meeting metal at distance. Sledge walked downrange with a spotting scope, checking the targets. When he came back, his expression had changed. Not quite respect, but something close. Center mass on all 5, he said. Tight group, you can shoot. Jordan cleared her weapon and stood up. Master Chief, I can do more than shoot. Sledge nodded slowly. Then he did something Jordan had not expected. He extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Captain. Try to keep up. Jordan shook his hand. His grip was firm enough to communicate strength without being aggressive. It was the handshake of someone who had been testing people his entire life and had learned to recognize the real thing when he saw it. At 1800 hours, the entire team assembled in the TOC for mission brief. The room was cramped, lit by overhead fluorescents that hummed with electrical current and the glow of computer screens displaying satellite imagery. A large map of Kunar province covered one wall, marked with grease pencil notations and push pins indicating known enemy positions. Lieutenant Commander Briggs stood at the front of the room next to a trim man in civilian clothes, who introduced himself as Agent Carver from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Carver had the look of someone who spent more time behind a desk than in the field, but his eyes were sharp and his briefing was professional. Gentlemen and Captain, Carver began, your target is Colonel Dmitry Volkov, age 58, former KGB, current Wagner Group contractor, operating as an advisor to anti-coalition forces in the Peach Valley. Intelligence suggests Volkov has been coordinating ambushes against coalition patrols and providing tactical training to local insurgent groups. Carver clicked a button and the projector screen changed to show a photograph of a man with Slavic features, gray hair, and cold blue eyes that looked like they had been chipped from ice. Volkov is a high-value target. He has operational knowledge of Wagner Group activities across multiple theaters. Capturing him alive is the priority. However, if capture is not feasible, lethal force is authorized. The screen changed again, this time showing satellite imagery of a compound nestled in a valley between 2 ridgelines. Mud brick walls, several buildings, a central courtyard. Target location is here, a village called Kamdesh, approximately 12 kilometers from this position. The compound belongs to a local elder named Malik, who we believe is providing shelter to Volkov. Your mission is to infiltrate the compound, capture or kill Volkov, and extract any intelligence materials present. Briggs stepped forward, taking over the brief. Infill by MH-60 Black Hawk, insert at LZ Alpha. He pointed to a spot on the map 3 kilometers south of the target. Hump in on foot, hit the compound at 0300. Rules of engagement are standard. Positive ID before engagement. Minimize civilian casualties. We go in quiet, we get our man, we get out. He looked around the room, making an eye contact with each member of the team. Torres, you are on point. Sledge, you have the big gun. Doc, you are with me in the stack. Comms, you stay on the net and keep us connected to air support. Captain Kade, he turned to Jordan, you are our overwatch. Find high ground, cover our approach, and make sure nobody flanks us. Jordan nodded. Overwatch was exactly where she wanted to be. From an elevated position, she would have line of sight on the compound. If Volkov tried to run, she would see him first. Questions? Briggs asked. Torres raised a hand. Sir, what is the backup plan if the LZ is hot? We have a secondary extract point here. Briggs pointed to another location on the map. If primary is compromised, we move to secondary and call for dust-off. Apache gunships are on standby at Jalalabad Airfield. 15 mics flight time if we need close air support. Sledge spoke up, his deep voice cutting through the room. What about civilians? If Malik has his family in the compound, what is the protocol? Separate and secure, Briggs said. We are not in the business of hurting non-combatants. If we encounter women or children, Kate handles it. That is why we have a female operator on the team. Jordan felt the eyes in the room shift to her. It was a role she had played before, the cultural support element. The woman brought along to search and secure female civilians in cultures where men touching women was forbidden. It was important work, but it was not why she was here. Understood, sir, she said. Carver spoke up again. One additional note. We have humans suggesting Volkov keeps personal effects from previous operations. Trophies, dog tags, insignia, photographs. If you encounter any such materials, they are to be secured and brought back for analysis. Jordan felt her pulse quicken, but kept her face neutral. This was it, the confirmation she needed. If her father's dog tags were in that compound, she would find them. The brief concluded. The team dispersed to prep gear and grab chow before wheels up. Jordan returned to the barracks, opened her wall locker, and began the ritual of preparing for combat. She laid out her equipment on the bunk with the precision of a surgeon arranging instruments. Plate carrier with ceramic armor plates, front and back. Magazine pouches loaded with 630-round magazines for her M4 carbine, her primary weapon for close quarters. Her M110 sniper rifle, broken down and stowed in a drag bag she would carry on her back. Night vision goggles, radio, trauma kit, camelback hydration system, grenades, smoke and fragmentation, zip tie cuffs, signal mirror, compass. She dressed in layers, moisture-wicking base layer, then the uniform, then the armor. Each piece of equipment went on in the same order every time, a routine so ingrained that her hands moved without conscious thought. Left magazine pouch, right magazine pouch, grenade pouch, medical pouch, radio on the left shoulder, antenna bent forward, rifle slung across the chest, muzzle down. When she was fully kitted, she stood in front of the small mirror mounted to the wall locker door. The woman looking back at her was unrecognizable from the person who had stood on the range at Fort Bragg 3 days ago. She was armored, armed, anonymous, behind layers of tactical equipment. The burn scar on her neck was hidden beneath the high collar of her uniform. This was the version of Jordan Kade that felt most real. Not the daughter grieving a father she never knew. Not the survivor carrying guilt from Syria. Just an operator with a mission. She pulled a small photograph from the pocket of her assault pack and looked at it for a long moment. It was the only picture she owned of her father. Black and white, grainy, taken sometime in the early 70s. James Kade in his dress uniform, green beret on his head, captain's bars on his collar, ribbons across his chest. He was smiling, a rare expression for a man who spent his life at war. Jordan had never known that smile. She had never heard his voice, never felt his hand on her shoulder, never had the chance to ask him all the questions that daughters ask fathers. But she was about to walk into a valley halfway around the world to find a piece of him, even if that piece was just a metal tag stamped with his name. She tucked the photograph back into her pocket, picked up her rifle, and walked to the flight line. The MH-60 Blackhawk sat on the tarmac with its rotors already turning, the blades cutting the night air with a rhythmic whump, whump, whump that Jordan felt in her chest. The crew chief, a young specialist with a headset clamped over his helmet, waved the team aboard. Jordan climbed into the cabin and found a seat on the starboard side, wedging herself between Sledge and the bulkhead. The interior of the helicopter was cramped and loud, the noise of the engines and rotors making conversation impossible without shouting directly into someone's ear. Briggs was up front near the cockpit, coordinating with the pilots. Torres sat across from Jordan, checking his rifle for the third time, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. Doc Hayes had his eyes closed, lips moving slightly, either praying or running through medical procedures in his head. Comms was testing his radio, keying the handset and listening to the squelch of static. Sledge nudged Jordan with his elbow and held up a small bag of peanut M&Ms. He shook a few into his palm and offered her the bag. Jordan shook her head. She never ate before a mission. Her stomach was too tight. The helicopter lifted off, nose dipping forward as it accelerated away from the fob. Through the open door, Jordan watched the base shrink below them, lights forming a small constellation in an ocean of darkness. Then they were over the mountains, following the contours of valleys invisible in the night, flying low and fast to avoid detection. The crew chief held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes. Jordan checked her rifle one last time. Chamber clear, safety on, magazine seated. She adjusted her night vision goggles, flipping them down over her eyes and watching the world transform into shades of green and black. The darkness outside became visible, the mountains resolving into jagged shapes against the slightly lighter sky. The helicopter flared hard, the nose pitching up as the pilots bled speed. Jordan felt her stomach drop as they descended rapidly toward the landing zone. Through the door, she could see nothing but dust, a brown cloud kicked up by the rotor wash that obscured everything. Ropes, the crew chief shouted. Thick braided lines were kicked out both doors. Torres went first, sliding down into the dust cloud and disappearing from view. Sledge went next, then Doc, then comms. Jordan grabbed the rope, wrapped her boots around it, and dropped. The descent lasted 3 seconds. Her gloves heated up from friction, the rope burning through the leather. Then her boots hit gravel and she released, dropping to one knee with her rifle up, scanning her sector through the green glow of night vision. The landing zone was a flat plateau of loose rock and scrub brush. Around her, the rest of the team materialized out of the dust, each man taking a knee and establishing a perimeter. Above them, the Black Hawk pulled pitch and climbed away, the sound of the rotors fading into the distance until the mountains swallowed it completely. Silence rushed in to fill the void. Absolute crushing silence. Jordan could hear her own breathing, the rustle of her uniform, the soft click of metal on metal as Sledge shifted his machine gun. The mountains loomed around them, invisible presences pressing down from all sides. Briggs keyed his radio, his voice a whisper in Jordan's earpiece. All stations, radio check. One by one, the team responded. Jordan was last. Overwatch, up. Briggs signaled for Torres to take point. The younger man stood, checked his compass and GPS, and started moving. The team fell into a staggered column, spacing themselves 10 meters apart, weapons at the ready. Jordan moved in the middle of the formation, her senses hyper-alert. Every shadow was a threat. Every sound, the rustle of wind through dead grass, the distant bark of a bomb, the creak of a rock shifting under someone's boot was magnified into potential danger. They moved for an hour through terrain that fought them at every step. Loose scree that shifted and clattered under their boots. Dry riverbeds choked with thorns. Slopes so steep that Jordan had to use her free hand to pull herself up, rifle slung across her back. Then Torres held up a fist and the column froze. He pointed ahead and slightly left. Jordan followed his gesture and saw it. A heat signature through her thermal optic, a bloom of white against the cool darkness. Someone was out there, maybe 400 meters away, standing on high ground overlooking their route. Briggs moved up to Jordan's position and looked through his own optic. Sentry, he whispered, could be a shepherd, could be a lookout. The figure was too far away to identify. It stood motionless for a long moment, then turned and began walking away, moving with purpose back toward the valley where the target compound lay. He saw us, Torres said. Maybe, Briggs replied. Or maybe he saw movement and is going to report it. Do we engage? Sledge asked, his finger already on the trigger of his M240 machine gun. Negative, Briggs said. No positive idea of a weapon. We let him go and we move fast. If he is reporting our position, we need to hit the compound before they can set up a defense. The team picked up the pace, moving from tactical walk to a controlled jog that covered ground quickly but still allowed them to watch their footing. Jordan's lungs burned in the thin mountain air. Sweat soaked through her uniform despite the cold night. They crested a rise and the Pet Valley opened up below them. Through night vision, Jordan could see the village of Kamdesh, a cluster of dark rectangles that marked mud brick buildings. One compound was larger than the others, surrounded by a high wall with what looked like guard towers at the corners. That is it, Briggs said. Target compound. Jordan broke off from the column, moving toward a rocky outcrop that overlooked the valley from the west. This was her position, the overwatch point where she would set up her sniper rifle and provide cover for the team as they moved in. She climbed the rocks, her breath coming in short gasps, and found a flat ledge about halfway up. Perfect. She had clear line of sight to the compound and the surrounding area. Anyone approaching or fleeing would be visible. Jordan unpacked her M110, extended the bipod, and settled into a prone position behind the weapon. Through the scope, the compound came into sharp focus. She could see the main building, a 2-story structure with a flat roof and what appeared to be a basement level, partially below ground. The courtyard was in the center, empty except for a few pieces of rusted farm equipment. She could see movement in one of the windows, a flicker of light that might have been a lantern or a flashlight. Overwatch in position, she whispered into her radio. Copy, Briggs replied. Stand by. Jordan watched through her scope as the team moved down into the valley, shadows flowing between shadows, invisible to anyone who was not specifically looking for them. They reached the outer wall of the compound and stacked up at the main gate, rifles raised, ready to breach. And that was when Jordan saw something that made her blood freeze. Hanging from a nail above the compound door, visible only because of the magnification of her scope, was a small object that caught the faint starlight. It was metallic, rectangular, dangling from a chain. A dog tag. Jordan adjusted her scope, dialing up the magnification until the tag filled her field of view. She could not read the name from this distance, but she could see the shape, the distinctive stamping of U.S. military identification tags. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, words she had never actually heard but had read in his last radio transmission 50 years ago. Tell my daughter a Kade never quits. Jordan keyed her radio, her voice tight. Briggs, hold position. I have eyes on what might be a trophy display above the main entrance. Recommend extreme caution. This could be a lure. There was a pause, then Briggs responded. Copy. We see it, moving to breach. Jordan wanted to scream at them to wait, to let her verify the tag first, to give her just 5 more seconds. But the mission was in motion. The breach charge detonated with a muffled thump that echoed off the valley walls. And then the valley exploded into fire. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 different positions simultaneously: the north ridge, the east slope, and from inside the compound itself. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness like angry fireflies, converging on the team's position at the gate. It was an ambush, a perfect, pre-planned, professionally executed ambush. And Jordan realized with terrible clarity that they had walked into a trap specifically designed for them. Volkov had known they were coming. He had been waiting. The first bullet arrived before the sound of the gunshot. That was the physics of supersonic warfare, the projectile outrunning its own birth cry. It hit the dirt 2 feet to the left of Lieutenant Commander Marcus Briggs, spraying gravel against his shin guards with enough force to sting through the fabric. Contact front! Briggs roared into his radio, his voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of a man who had survived 100 firefights and knew that panic killed faster than bullets. The valley erupted. Muzzle flashes sparked from 3 directions simultaneously. A coordinated ambush with overlapping fields of fire that turned the compound entrance into a kill zone measured in inches rather than feet. The sound was overwhelming, a continuous roar that obliterated individual shots into a wall of noise that pressed against eardrums and made thinking difficult. Torres went down first. The point man had been standing closest to the gate, his rifle raised, ready to move through the breach. The round caught him in the upper thigh, just below the edge of his body armor, where the femoral artery ran close to the surface. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his legs folding beneath him, his rifle clattering on stone. Man down! Doc Hayes yelled, already moving before the words left his mouth. The corpsman threw himself across the open ground, sliding the last 3 feet on his knees to reach Torres. Man down, Torres is hit. From her position 400 meters up the western ridge, Captain Jordan Kade watched the ambush unfold through her rifle scope with the detached clarity of someone whose training had overridden her capacity for fear. The green glow of her night vision turned the valley into a landscape of ghosts and shadows, but the thermal overlay painted a different picture. Heat signatures bloomed like flowers in the darkness, the white-hot signatures of human bodies, the yellow smear of muzzle flashes, the orange glow of Torres bleeding out on the ground. Jordan's mind processed the tactical geometry with mathematical precision. 3 enemy positions: North Ridge at her 11 o'clock, approximately 600 meters, East Slope at 2 o'clock, 500 meters, and the compound itself, multiple shooters firing from windows in the rooftop, 300 meters. L-shaped ambush, she transmitted, her voice calm despite the adrenaline dump that made her hands want to shake. Multiple shooters, heavy weapons. You are in the kill zone, Briggs. You need to move now. Roger, moving, Briggs responded, but there was nowhere to move. The team had breached the compound gate and was caught in the fatal funnel, that space where attackers were most vulnerable and defenders had every advantage. Behind them was open ground with no cover. In front of them was the compound courtyard, dominated by enemy fire from elevated positions. To either side, the narrow street between mud brick walls funneled them into a corridor of death. Sledge, get the 240 up, Briggs ordered. We need suppression on that north ridge. Master Chief Roy Cunningham, call sign Sledge, was already moving. The Big SEAL dropped to one knee behind a low stone wall that provided marginal cover, swinging his M240 machine gun off his shoulder and onto the improvised firing position. The weapon was a crew-served beast, 27 pounds of steel and polymer that fired 7.62 millimeter rounds at a cyclic rate of 900 rounds per minute. In Sledge's hands, it became an instrument of controlled violence. He pressed the buttstock into his shoulder, acquired a target through his optic, and squeezed the trigger. The M240 roared, a sound like canvas ripping amplified through a concert speaker. Brass casings ejected in a glittering stream, bouncing off stone and rolling away. The tracers arced out into the darkness, every fifth round burning bright red as it cut through the night toward the enemy position on the North Ridge. Downrange dirt and rock exploded as the heavy rounds impacted. The enemy fire from that direction slackened for a moment as the shooters dove for cover. "That is it, Sledge!" Briggs yelled. "Keep pouring it on!" But even as Sledge suppressed the North Ridge, the enemy on the east slope adjusted their aim. A Dragunov sniper rifle cracked, the distinctive report of a Russian marksman weapon cutting through the chaos. The round was a 7.62 by 54 millimeter, a Cold War-era cartridge that had killed American soldiers in a dozen different wars across 50 years. It hit Sledge in the right shoulder, just above the edge of his body armor, where the plate carrier ended and the soft tissue of the upper arm began. The impact spun him sideways, his finger reflexively tightening on the trigger of the M240 and sending a wild burst into the sky before he collapsed backward. "Sledge is down!" Comms Rivera screamed into the radio, his voice cracked with panic, the professional calm fracturing under the weight of watching men die. "Sledge is hit. We need to move. We need to move now." Jordan shifted her aim to the east slope, scanning for the sniper who had shot Sledge. Through her scope, she saw movement behind a rocky outcrop, a flicker of heat that resolved into a man rising from a prone position to relocate. He was good, professional, using fire and movement to avoid counterfire. But he made one mistake. He stood up just long enough for Jordan to see his face through the scope. "Target acquired," Jordan transmitted. "East slope, 500 meters. I have the sniper." "Take the shot," Briggs ordered. Jordan settled her breathing. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. Her heart rate, elevated by adrenaline, was running at 90 beats per minute. Too high for precision work. She needed to slow it down. She thought about her father, thought about the photograph in her pocket, thought about the metal dog tag hanging above the compound door. Her heart rate dropped to 70, then 60, then 50. The crosshair of her scope settled on the sniper's center mass. At 500 meters, she needed to account for bullet drop, approximately 4 feet. Wind was gusting from the west, maybe 6 miles per hour, which would push the round 8 inches to the right. She held the reticle slightly left and high, compensating for both factors. The space between heartbeats was where the perfect shot lived, the pause where the body was completely still, where the rifle barrel did not waver even a fraction of an inch. Jordan found that space and pressed the trigger. The M110 bucked against her shoulder, the suppressor turning the sharp crack of the shot into a muffled cough that would not give away her position. She kept her eye in the scope, watching the trace of the bullet arc across the valley. 500 meters away, the enemy sniper's chest caved in. He folded backward, his rifle tumbling from his hands, and disappeared behind the rocks. "Sniper down," Jordan reported. "East slope clear." "Good shot," Briggs transmitted. "Now get eyes on the compound. We need to know what we are dealing with." Jordan pivoted her rifle toward the target building, scanning the windows and rooftop. Through her thermal optic, she counted at least 8 heat signatures inside the compound, moving between positions with tactical discipline. These were not local insurgents firing wildly in the general direction of the enemy. These were trained fighters executing a coordinated defense. "At least 8 enemy inside the compound," Jordan reported. "Multiple shooters on the roof, multiple on the ground floor. They have overlapping fields of fire, and they are dug in." "Can you suppress them?" Briggs asked. "Negative," Jordan replied. "I do not have the angle. I can see the rooftop, but I cannot hit anyone behind the parapet walls. You need to get to hard cover before they bring up heavier weapons." As if summoned by her words, a new sound joined the cacophony. The hollow thump of a mortar tube firing, a sound that every infantryman learned to recognize and fear. It came from inside the compound courtyard, hidden from Jordan's line of sight but unmistakable in its lethal promise. "Incoming!" she screamed into the radio. "Mortar, get down!" The team scattered, each man diving for whatever cover existed. Briggs threw himself behind an overturned cart. Doc Hayes draped his body over Torres, using his own mass to shield the wounded man. Coms Rivera pressed himself into a doorway, making himself as small as possible. The mortar round landed 20 meters behind their position, detonating with the concussion that Jordan felt even from 400 meters away. The explosion threw up a geyser of dirt and stone, shrapnel singing through the air with a sound like angry hornets. The blast wave slammed into the team, rattling teeth and collapsing lungs. "They are bracketing us!" Briggs gasped into his radio, his voice tight with pain and lack of oxygen. "Next round is going to be on target. We have maybe 30 seconds. Jordan scanned the compound looking for the mortar position. She could not see the tube itself, hidden somewhere in the courtyard, but she could see the secondary effects. The puff of smoke rising after each shot, the movement of men loading rounds. "Briggs, the mortar is in the courtyard center," she transmitted. "I cannot hit it from this angle. You need to move or you need to destroy it." "With what?" Briggs shot back. "We are pinned down and I have 2 men wounded." Jordan looked at the tactical situation with cold calculation. The team was trapped in a kill zone with no cover and no room to maneuver. The mortar crew was walking their rounds closer with each shot, adjusting based on the impacts. The next round would land directly on the team's position. After that, it was just a matter of loading and firing until everyone was dead. There was only one solution, and it required someone to do something tactically insane. Jordan began stripping off her gear. She unbuckled her plate carrier and let it fall to the ground. 20 pounds of ceramic armor plates clattered on stone. She dropped her assault pack, her night vision goggles, her helmet. Everything that added weight, everything that would slow her down. She kept only her rifle, her chest rig with 4 magazines, and her sidearm. "What are you doing, Kade?" Briggs demanded. "I am going to flank them," Jordan replied. Her voice was steady, emotionless. The voice of someone who had already made the decision and was simply reporting the facts. "Negative, you will get yourself killed. Stand down, that is an order." "Sir, Torres has maybe 5 minutes before he bleeds out. Sledge needs medical attention. That mortar crew is going to drop a round right on your head in the next minute. The math is simple. Either I move now or we all die here." There was a long pause. Jordan could hear Briggs breathing hard over the radio, could imagine him calculating the same equation she had just run. Time versus distance, risk versus necessity. The lives of 6 men balanced against the probable death of 1. "How?" Briggs finally asked. There was a dry riverbed that ran from Jordan's position down into the valley, a natural depression that would provide partial cover from the enemy positions on the ridges. If she moved fast enough, if she stayed low enough, she could reach the western edge of the compound without being seen. From there, it was 800 meters of open ground to the compound wall, 800 meters that would be covered by every gun in the valley the moment she broke cover. But the enemy was focused on the team at the gate. They were not expecting someone to come from a different direction. Surprise was worth more than armor. "I'm going to run," Jordan said simply. "You will never make it. Watch me." Jordan took one last look through her scope at the compound, at the dog tag hanging above the door, glinting in the starlight, at the windows where enemy muzzle flashes sparkled, at the courtyard where her father's murderer was coordinating the ambush that was going to kill 6 good men unless someone did something. She stood up, shouldered her rifle, and started running down the hill. The terrain was treacherous, loose scree, and jagged rocks that shifted under her boots with every step. Jordan did not slow down. She had run these mountains in training, had spent 1,000 hours on treadmills and obstacle courses, preparing her body for exactly this moment. Her legs were pistons, driving her downhill in long strides that ate up distance. She hit the dry riverbed and turned east, sprinting along the sandy bottom with her rifle held across her chest. The walls of the wadi rose on either side, maybe 6 feet high, just enough to hide her from the enemy positions on the ridges. Her breath came in hard gasps, the thin mountain air starving her muscles of oxygen. Her heart rate spiked to 140 beats per minute. Behind her, she heard the mortar tube fire again, heard Briggs yelling into the radio for everyone to take cover, heard the explosion closer this time, close enough that the shock wave traveled down the wadi and pushed against her back like a physical hand. She reached the end of the riverbed and stopped at the edge, pressing herself against the dirt wall. Ahead was open ground, a flat expanse of rock and scrub that stretched 800 meters to the compound wall. No cover, no concealment, just distance and the hope that she could cross it before the bullets found her. Jordan keyed her radio one last time. "Briggs, I am going now. When you see them shift fire to me, move Torres to hard cover. There was static, then Briggs' voice, rough with emotion. Godspeed, Captain. Jordan exploded out of the wadi at a full sprint. For the first 3 seconds, she was invisible, just another shadow in a valley full of shadows. Then someone on the north ridge saw movement and yelled a warning in a language Jordan did not speak but understood perfectly. There, shoot her, kill the runner. The valley pivoted. Every gun that had been firing at the team at the gate swung toward the lone figure sprinting across open ground. Muzzle flashes erupted like stars being born, tracer rounds arcing through the darkness in streams of red and green. Jordan ran. She did not run in a straight line. That was suicide. She cut left for 4 strides, then hard right for 3, then straight for 5. A random pattern with no rhythm, designed to force the shooters to constantly adjust their aim, to lead a target that refused to be predictable. The ground around her began to boil. Bullets hit the dirt, throwing up geysers of dust and stone fragments that stung her face and hands. The air buzzed with the supersonic crack of rounds passing close enough to feel the displacement. She was 50 meters into the run when the first round found her. It did not hit flesh. It hit the barrel of her rifle, a 1 in a million shot that struck the metal with enough force to rip the weapon from her hands and send it spinning away into the darkness. The impact numbed her fingers, made her stumble, but she did not stop. The rifle was gone, but she still had her sidearm and her legs. 100 meters. She was a quarter of the way there. Her lungs were screaming, her vision tunneling, black spots dancing at the edges. The burn scar on her neck felt like it was on fire again, the phantom pain of Aleppo overlaying the very real pain of Afghanistan. Keep moving. If you stop, you die. 200 meters. Halfway. A heavy machine gun opened up from the compound rooftop, the distinctive sound of a DSHK, a Russian 12.7 millimeter weapon that fired rounds the size of a man's finger. The gunner walked his fire toward her, each impact cratering the earth in explosions of dirt and rock. Jordan saw the line of impacts approaching like a predator, running her down. She planted her right foot and dove left, throwing herself into a shoulder roll that would have shattered bones if she still wore armor. The DSHK rounds tore through the space she had occupied half a second earlier, so close that the muzzle blast singed her hair. She came up running, her shoulders screaming in protest, possibly dislocated, but still functional. 300 meters to go. Behind her, through the chaos, she heard Briggs on the radio. Move, move, move. Get Torres to the building. Sledge, can you walk? Sledge's voice, weak but defiant. I can shoot. Get me to a window and give me a rifle. The team was moving, using the distraction Jordan had created to displace from the kill zone to a fortified position. Her suicide run was working. Men were going to live because she had chosen to draw fire. But she was not going to make it. Jordan knew it with cold certainty. The math that had seemed possible 400 meters ago had changed. She was exhausted, her speed dropping from a sprint to something barely faster than a jog. The enemy had her ranged now, had adjusted to her pattern. The next burst was going to hit. She thought about her mother dying in a hospice bed, asking Jordan to tell her father that she had waited. She thought about James Kade, captured and dragged away to die in a Soviet prison, never knowing that he had a daughter who would spend her life searching for him. A Kade never quits. Jordan found reserves she did not know existed. She dug deeper, pushed harder, forced her legs to cycle faster. 400 meters, 500. That was when the bullet hit her helmet. The round struck the Kevlar at an oblique angle, glancing off the curve of the helmet instead of punching through. But the kinetic energy had to go somewhere. It transferred into her skull, into her neck, into the muscles and nerves that control balance and consciousness. The world went white, then black, then a nauseating swirl of colors that made no sense. Jordan's legs tangled. She pitched forward, her momentum carrying her into a sprawling slide that tore through her uniform and ground dirt into the raw flesh of her knees and elbows. She slid 3 meters and came to a stop, face down in the rocks. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no pain, no thought. Just the taste of blood and dirt in her mouth and the strange sensation of being very far away from her own body. Then the world came rushing back. The sound of gunfire, the radio crackling in her ear, Briggs yelling her name. Kade, are you hit? Kade, report. Jordan pushed herself to her hands and knees. Her head felt like it had been struck with a sledgehammer. Her vision doubled, tripled, then slowly resolved into something approaching normal. She reached up and touched her helmet. Her fingers came away wet. Blood, but not from a penetrating wound. The impact had split the skin above her ear, but the helmet had held. She was alive. 600 meters from the compound. 200 meters to go. Jordan stood up. Her legs nearly buckled. She forced them to lock, to hold her weight. She took one step, then another. She was not running anymore. She was staggering, weaving like a drunk, but she was moving forward. The enemy fire intensified. They knew she was wounded, knew she was vulnerable. This was the moment to finish her. Rounds impacted all around her. A forest of death that somehow, impossibly, continued to miss. 100 meters. Jordan pulled her sidearm, a Beretta M9, 15 rounds of 9mm that would be useless against the fortified positions ahead, but made her feel less naked than running unarmed toward an enemy compound. 50 meters. She could see the compound wall now, could see the gate where the team had breached, could see the dog tag hanging above the entrance, swaying slightly in the wind. 20 meters. Jordan threw herself the final distance, diving behind the compound wall and pressing her back against the mud brick. Bullets continued to snap overhead, but she was out of the direct line of fire. She had made it. 800 meters through a kill zone, and she had made it. She keyed her radio, gasping for air. Overwatch is at the compound wall. I am moving to the courtyard. Negative, Briggs transmitted. Hold position. We are coming to you. No time, Jordan replied. That mortar crew is still active. I can get an angle on them from inside. She did not wait for permission. She moved along the wall, toward the gate, her sidearm raised. The entrance was a shattered mess of splintered wood and twisted metal from the breaching charge. Jordan stepped through, scanning corners and shadows. The courtyard was empty. No, not empty. There were bodies, 3 of them, enemy fighters who had been killed in the initial exchange of fire. And in the center of the open space, exactly where Jordan had calculated, was the mortar tube. But the crew was gone. Jordan moved toward the mortar, keeping her pistol up, sweeping for threats. The tube was a Chinese-made 60mm, simple and reliable, and capable of dropping high explosive rounds with devastating accuracy. Next to it was a stack of ammunition, fin projectiles waiting to be loaded and fired. She was reaching for the mortar, planning to disable it when she heard the voice behind her. Captain Kade, I have been waiting for you. Jordan spun, bringing her pistol up, but she was too slow. The man standing in the doorway of the main building had a rifle already aimed at her center mass. At this range, maybe 5 meters, even a mediocre shooter could not miss. But he did not fire. He just stood there, backlit by the interior lights, his face hidden in shadow, but his posture radiating confidence. Drop the weapon, the man said. His English was perfect, barely accented, the voice of someone who had spent years studying the language of his enemies. Jordan did not drop her weapon. She kept it trained on his silhouette, her finger on the trigger, knowing that if she fired, he would fire and they would both die. You must be Volkov, she said. The man stepped forward into the faint starlight, and Jordan saw his face for the first time. He was older than his photograph suggested, late 50s, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. But those eyes were sharp, intelligent, the eyes of a predator who had survived in the most dangerous profession on Earth for 4 decades. Colonel Dmitry Volkov, he said, inclining his head slightly, and you are the daughter of Captain James Kade. You look like your mother. Margaret, yes? I saw her photograph once. Your father carried it in his wallet. Jordan's hand tightened on her pistol. Where is he? Where is my father? Volkov smiled. It was not a cruel smile. It was almost sad. Your father was a brave man, Captain. The bravest I ever interrogated. We kept him for 3 years. 3 years of questions, and he never broke. Never gave us anything useful. We tried everything. Pain, drugs, psychological pressure. Nothing worked. Jordan felt something cold settle in her chest. You killed him. No, Volkov said. I did not kill him. I kept him alive. I traded him to the KGB in Moscow in exchange for a promotion. After that, I do not know what happened to him. That was 50 years ago. He shifted his rifle slightly, a small adjustment that kept it trained on Jordan while also allowing him to gesture with one hand toward the building behind him. But I kept something, a souvenir. Your father told me during one of our sessions that he had a daughter, an infant. He said he was fighting to get home to her. I found that touching. So when the KGB took him away, I kept his dog tags, as a reminder that even brave men fail. Jordan's world narrowed to a single point, the dog tags, her father's name stamped in metal, hanging somewhere in this compound. Show me, she demanded. Volkov shook his head. I think not. You see, Captain, you are valuable. More valuable than your father ever was. The American military does not leave officers behind, especially female officers, especially heroes. And you are a hero, yes? Bronze Star for Valor. Distinguished service. Your capture would be quite the propaganda victory. He raised his voice, calling out in Russian. 4 men emerged from the building, all armed, all wearing the tactical gear of professional contractors. Wagner Group, you will put down your weapon and you will surrender, Volkov said, or I will kill you and hang your dog tags next to your father's. Your choice. Jordan calculated the odds. 5 armed men against 1 with a pistol. Even if she killed Volkov, the others would cut her down before she could shift targets. She was trapped. But then she heard something that changed everything. The sound of rotor blades in the distance, growing louder. And Briggs' voice on the radio, transmitted to the entire team and patched through to the Apache gunships that had just arrived on station. Danger close, Briggs called. All friendly personnel are in the northeast building. Target building is the 2-story southwest structure. Light it up. Volkov heard it too. His expression changed, the confidence evaporating into something approaching fear. No, he whispered. Jordan smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just realized they were going to die but was going to take their enemy with them. See you in hell, Colonel. She dove for the ground as the first Hellfire missile screamed out of the sky. The Hellfire missile did not explode on impact. It was a thermobaric warhead designed to penetrate structures before detonation, to kill not just with shrapnel, but with overpressure that collapsed lungs and ruptured organs. The weapon punched through the roof of the 2-story building like the fist of an angry god, disappeared into the interior, and then the world turned white. The explosion was not a sound. It was a physical force that picked Jordan Kade up off the ground where she had thrown herself flat and slammed her against the compound wall 10 feet away. Her body armor was gone, stripped away in her sprint across the valley, and the impact drove the air from her lungs with enough violence that for a moment she could not remember how to breathe. The building that Colonel Dmitry Volkov had been standing in front of simply ceased to exist. The mud brick walls, 3 feet thick and hardened by decades of sun, disintegrated into powder. The roof collapsed inward, timbers cracking like rifle shots. A mushroom cloud of dust and smoke rose into the night sky, lit from within by secondary explosions as ammunition and fuel cooked off. Jordan lay on her back, staring up at the stars that spun in lazy circles above her. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. She could not hear the second Apache gunship making its gun run. She could not hear Briggs screaming into the radio. She could not hear her own ragged breathing as her lungs finally remembered their function and dragged in air thick with dust and the chemical smell of high explosives. Move, her brain commanded. Get up. Move or die. Jordan rolled onto her side, pushed herself to her hands and knees, and vomited into the dirt. Her stomach was empty. Nothing to bring up but bile and fear, but her body convulsed anyway, trying to purge the trauma of the blast wave. When the heaving stopped, she looked up. The compound was gone. Where the 2-story building had stood, there was now a crater, a smoking wound in the earth surrounded by rubble and twisted metal. Fires burned in 3 different locations, casting dancing shadows on the remaining walls. Jordan's hand went to her radio, keying the transmit button. Overwatch, she croaked. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from dust and shock. Overwatch is still up. The radio crackled. Briggs' voice, distorted by static and distance, but unmistakably relieved. Kade, Jesus Christ, we thought you were in the building. What is your status? Jordan took inventory. Her left shoulder screamed with pain, probably dislocated from the impact against the wall. Her head throbbed where the bullet had grazed her helmet. Her knees and elbows were raw from sliding across rock. But she was alive and functional. Mobile with injuries, she transmitted. The target building is destroyed. I need to search for remains. Negative, stay put. We are coming to you. No, Jordan said. And this time her voice was stronger. There was something in that building, my father's dog tags. I need to find them. She did not wait for permission. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly as her balance caught up with her intention, and walked toward the crater. The heat hit her first, a wall of thermal energy radiating from the rubble. It was not as intense as the fire in Syria had been, not the soul-destroying inferno that had branded her neck and her memory, but it was enough to make her hesitate, enough to trigger the muscle memory of burning, the phantom pain that lived in her scar tissue. Jordan closed her eyes, took a breath, and stepped forward into the heat. The rubble was unstable, shifting under her boots with every step. Twisted rebar jutted up like the bones of a dead giant. Chunks of concrete the size of cars teetered on edge, ready to collapse at the slightest disturbance. Jordan moved carefully, testing each foothold before committing her weight. She was looking for bodies. Volkov had been standing maybe 15 feet from the building when the missile hit. The blast should have killed him, should have scattered him across the compound in pieces too small to identify. But Jordan had learned in 3 combat deployments that should have was a dangerous assumption. She had seen men survive impossible wounds and die from minor ones. She needed confirmation. She found the first body wedged between 2 slabs of collapsed wall. It was one of the Wagner Group contractors, burned beyond recognition. His tactical gear melted into his flesh. Jordan checked for identification, found nothing, and moved on. The second body was closer to the crater, more intact but just as dead. Another contractor, this one killed by shrapnel. His chest opened up like a broken egg. No dog tags, no identification. Jordan climbed deeper into the rubble, into the heart of the destruction, where the heat was intense enough to singe the hair on her arms. She was looking for the interior rooms, the places where Volkov might have kept his trophies, his collection of metal and memory stolen from the men he had killed or captured. That was when she heard the sound, faint, barely audible over the crackle of flames and the groan of settling debris. A wet, labored breathing, the sound of someone dying slowly. Jordan turned toward the noise, scrambling over a pile of shattered brick. On the other side, pinned beneath a fallen roof beam, was Colonel Dmitry Volkov. He was alive. Barely. The beam had crushed his legs, the impact shattering both femurs and trapping him in place. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and thick. His face was gray, the color of old concrete, his lips blue from shock and blood loss. But his eyes were open, and when he saw Jordan, he smiled. "Captain Kade," he whispered, "still alive. You are hard to kill." Jordan knelt beside him, out of reach in case he had a weapon hidden. But his hands were empty, pinned at his sides by the debris. "Where are my father's dog tags?" Jordan demanded. Volkov coughed, a wet sound that brought up blood. It ran from the corner of his mouth, black in the firelight. "Inside," he said, tilting his head toward what remained of the building's interior, there was a room, a safe. Combination is 4972, December 4th, 1972. The day I captured your father. Jordan stared at him. The man was dying, crushed and bleeding out, and he was still playing games. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Volkov said, his voice fading, "I want you to know the truth before I die. Your father was a brave man, the bravest I ever met, and I respected him. I kept his tags not as a trophy, but as a reminder that courage exists, even in my enemies." He coughed again, harder this time. More blood. "Go," he said. "Find them. But know this, your father may still be alive. I traded him to the KGB, yes, but I heard rumors years later that the prisoner was kept in a facility near the Chinese border. The Soviets did not waste valuable intelligence assets. If he survived, if he is still alive somewhere, you may yet find him." Jordan's hands began to shake. She had come to Afghanistan expecting to find closure, to recover dog tags and bury the ghost of a father she never knew. But now Volkov was offering something far more dangerous. Hope. "Where?" she demanded. "What facility?" Volkov's eyes began to drift closed. His breathing was shallow now, the spaces between breaths growing longer. "I do not know," he whispered. "But there is a man in Moscow, former KGB. He would know. His name is..." The breath stopped. The eyes went vacant. Colonel Dmitry Volkov died pinned beneath the ruins of his final battlefield, taking his secrets with him into the dark. Jordan wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him, to drag him back from death and force him to finish the sentence. But the dead did not speak, and she had learned long ago that rage was useless against the inevitable. She stood up and turned toward the interior of the ruined building. Somewhere in that wreckage was a safe. Inside that safe were her father's dog tags and possibly information that could lead her to the truth. If James Kade was alive, if he had survived 50 years of captivity, then Jordan would find him. A Kade never quits. She climbed deeper into the rubble. The interior of the building was a maze of collapsed floors and shattered walls. Jordan moved through it like a ghost, squeezing through gaps barely wide enough for her shoulders, crawling over obstacles that shifted and groaned under her weight. The heat was intense, sweat pouring down her face, stinging her eyes. The burn scar on her neck throbbed with every heartbeat. She found the room in what had been the basement level. The floor above had collapsed, creating a precarious ceiling of broken timbers and twisted metal, but the walls were still standing. And against the far wall, partially buried under debris, was a heavy steel safe. Jordan cleared the rubble with her hands, ignoring the way the sharp edges cut her palms. The safe was old, Soviet-era, painted green and stenciled with Cyrillic letters she could not read. But the combination lock was standard, a four-number dial. 4972, December 4th, 1972. The day her father disappeared. Jordan spun the dial with trembling fingers. Right to 4, left to 9, right to 7, left to 2. She pulled the handle. The safe opened. Inside was a collection of items that told the story of a killer's career. Medals, Soviet and Russian, arrayed on faded ribbons. Photographs of men in uniform, some smiling, some dead. Documents in Cyrillic script. And at the bottom, wrapped in an oilcloth, was a small bundle of metal. Jordan lifted it out and unwrapped it with shaking hands. Dog tags. Not one pair. 7 pairs. 7 American soldiers, their names stamped in metal, their blood types and service numbers preserved for eternity. Jordan read them one by one, memorizing the names, honoring the dead with the only thing she could offer. Witness: Davis, Michael T. Rodriguez, Carlos Joti. Chen, William H. Mitchell, Robert E. And there, at the bottom of the pile, 2 tags on a chain that had once been silver but was now tarnished black. Kade, James R. Opus, United States Army. Jordan closed her fist around the tags. The metal was cold against her palm, solid, real. This was not a ghost. This was proof. Her father had existed. He had fought. He had bled. And someone had cared enough to keep his name, even if that someone was his enemy. She bowed her head, and for the first time in 29 years, Captain Jordan Kade wept. Not for the father she never knew, not for the years she had lost, but for the simple, overwhelming relief of knowing that the search was over. She had found him, or at least she had found the piece of him that mattered most. His name, his identity, the proof that James Kade had been a real man, not just a shadow on a wall. The weeping lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then she wiped her eyes, slipped the dog tags around her neck, and climbed out of the rubble. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Briggs was waiting for her in the courtyard. He had moved the team from the building where they had taken cover, establishing a security perimeter around the compound while they waited for the medevac helicopters to arrive. Torres was on a stretcher, unconscious but stable. Doc Hayes having packed his wound and run 2 IVs to replace the blood he had lost. Sledge sat propped against the wall, his shoulder bandaged, his face tight with pain, but his eyes alert. Briggs saw Jordan emerge from the ruins and walk to meet her. He took one look at her face, at the tears cutting tracks through the dust and soot, at the dog tags hanging around her neck, and he understood. "You found them," he said quietly. Jordan nodded. She could not speak. Her throat was too tight. Briggs reached out and gripped her shoulder, the gesture of a commander and a father both. "I am sorry, Captain, for your loss." Jordan found her voice. "Thank you, sir. But it is not just loss. Volkov said something before he died. He said my father might still be alive, that the KGB kept him in a facility somewhere near the Chinese border." Briggs frowned. "That was 50 years ago, Kade. Even if it was true, the odds that he survived—" "I know the odds," Jordan said. "But I have to know. I have to follow this until there is nothing left to follow." Before Briggs could respond, Comms Rivera called out from his position near the gate. "LT, we have movement. North side of the compound. Could be survivors." Briggs and Jordan both turned, weapons raised. Through the smoke and firelight, a figure stumbled into view. An old man, thin to the point of emaciation, dressed in filthy clothes that might have once been a prison jumpsuit. He walked with a pronounced limp, his right leg dragging behind him. His face was hidden behind a long gray beard, matted and unkempt. But his eyes were clear and sharp and focused directly on Jordan. The old man took 3 more steps and collapsed. Jordan ran to him, dropping to her knees and rolling him onto his back. His pulse was thready, his breathing shallow. He was dying, whether from injury or age or simple exhaustion, Jordan could not tell. "Doc," she yelled, "I need you here now." Hayes grabbed his aid bag and sprinted across the courtyard, sliding to a stop beside her. He began assessment, checking vitals, looking for wounds. The old man's hand shot out and grabbed Jordan's wrist. His grip was weak but insistent. He pulled her down until her ear was next to his mouth. "Jordan," he whispered. His voice was barely a breath. "Rough from disuse, my baby girl." Jordan froze. The world stopped spinning. Time itself seemed to pause, waiting for her to catch up to the impossible reality. She pulled back and looked at the man's face. Really looked. Past the beard, and the years, and the damage that half a century of captivity had inflicted. She saw the shape of his jaw, the color of his eyes, the scar above his left eyebrow that was visible in the photograph she carried. "Dad," she whispered. The old man smiled. It was the smile from the photograph, hidden beneath years of pain, but still recognizable. "I told them," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "I told them Kade never quits. I knew you would come." Jordan's world shattered and rebuilt itself in the space of a heartbeat. Her father was alive. James Kade, missing for 50 years, presumed dead, name carved on a memorial wall, was alive and breathing and holding her hand. Doc Hayes was talking, his voice urgent. "Captain, he has multiple fractures, signs of long-term malnutrition, possible organ failure. We need to get him on a bird now, or he is not going to make it." Jordan looked at Briggs. The SEAL commander was already on the radio. "Viking base, this is Viking 1-1. We need priority medevac for 2 urgent surgical and 1 critical. I say again, 1 critical. Get birds in the air now." The response was immediate. "Roger, Viking 1-1. Dust off inbound, ETA 8 minutes. James Kade's grip on Jordan's wrist tightened. "I thought about you," he said. "Every day. I tried to escape. 17 times. They broke my legs the last time. I could not run anymore. But I never stopped believing I would see you. Dad, save your strength. We are getting you out of here." "No," James said, and there was urgency in his voice now. "Listen, the KGB kept me because I had information, codes, procedures. I never talked, never gave them anything. But they kept me alive because they thought someday I would break." He coughed, a wet rattling sound. "I did not break, but I am breaking now." Jordan leaned closer. "There were others," James whispered. "American prisoners. I saw them years ago before they moved me to isolation. They might still be alive. Someone has to go back for them. Someone has to finish what we started." "I will," Jordan promised. "I will go back. I will find them." James Kade looked at his daughter, really seeing her for the first time. Seeing the uniform, the weapons, the scars. Seeing the woman she had become without him. "You became a soldier," he said. "Like your old man." "I became a soldier to find you," Jordan replied. "And I did." James smiled again, but this time there was sadness in it. "I am sorry," he said. "Sorry I was not there. Sorry your mother died waiting. Sorry you had to carry this alone." Jordan shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You survived. You never quit. That is all that matters." The sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. The medevac birds were arriving, 2 Black Hawks configured for casualty evacuation, red crosses painted on their sides. They flared over the compound, kicking up a storm of dust. The flight medics jumped out before the wheels touched ground, running with stretchers. Doc Hayes briefed them rapid fire, medical terminology that Jordan did not fully understand but recognized as serious. Torres went on the first stretcher. Sledge walked to the second bird on his own power, refusing the stretcher with a growl. The third stretcher was for James Kade. The medics loaded him with practiced efficiency, strapping him down, starting IVs, attaching monitoring equipment. Jordan walked beside the stretcher as they carried him to the helicopter, unwilling to let go of his hand. At the door of the Black Hawk, one of the medics stopped her. "Ma'am, we need room to work. You will have to ride in the other bird." Jordan looked at her father. James Kade looked back at her. "Go," he said. "I will be okay. I waited 50 years. I can wait another hour." Jordan nodded. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, baby girl. Tell your mother I am sorry I kept her waiting." And then the medics pulled the stretcher into the helicopter, and the door closed, and Jordan was left standing in the dust as the Black Hawk lifted off and banked away toward Bagram Airfield. Briggs appeared at her shoulder. "Come on, Captain. Let us go home." Jordan climbed into the second helicopter and strapped into a seat between Sledge and comms. The aircraft lifted off, following the first bird into the darkness. Through the open door, Jordan watched the compound shrink below them, the fire still burning, the smoke rising into the night sky. She touched the dog tags around her neck, her father's name cold against her skin. Master Chief Sledge leaned over and spoke directly into her ear, loud enough to be heard over the rotor noise. Your old man is tough. He is gonna make it. Jordan looked at him, at this giant of a man who had judged her and then accepted her and then fought beside her. I know, she said, because a Kade never quits. Sledge grinned and settled back against the bulkhead, closing his eyes. Jordan looked out the door one last time, watching Afghanistan slide past beneath them. She had come here looking for closure, looking to bury a ghost. Instead, she had found resurrection. Her father was alive. Against every odd, against 50 years of captivity and torture and isolation, James Kade had survived. But the fight was not over. There were others, he had said, other American prisoners forgotten by history, rotting in prisons that officially did not exist. Someone had to go back for them. Jordan closed her hand around the dog tags and made a silent promise. To her father, to the men whose names were stamped in the medal she held, to herself. She would go back. She would find them. She would bring them home. Because that was what soldiers did. They finished the mission. They left no one behind. And Kade never ever quit. The helicopter climbed higher, chasing the dawn, carrying Jordan away from one battlefield and toward the next. Behind them, the sun began to rise over the mountains of Afghanistan, painting the peaks in the shades of gold and red. A new day, a new mission. And somewhere in the cargo bay of a medevac helicopter racing toward a surgical unit, an old man who had been dead for 50 years took his first free breath and whispered a name he had not spoken aloud in half a century. Margaret. His daughter heard it through the radio static and the engine noise, carried on the wind in the impossible hope that love could survive anything, even death. She smiled through her tears and whispered back, I will tell her, Dad. I will tell her you came home. The surgical suite at Bagram Airfield existed in a state of controlled chaos. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the cold blue white of clinical efficiency. The air smelled of disinfectant and blood, a combination that had become as familiar to military surgeons as the scent of coffee to office workers. But familiarity did not breed comfort, not when the patient on the table had been dead for 50 years. Captain Jordan Kade stood outside the operating room, separated from her father by a wall of glass and the knowledge that she was powerless to help him. She had stripped off her tactical gear in the hallway, leaving herself in sweat-soaked fatigues and boots caked with Afghan dirt. The burn scar on her neck throbbed with every heartbeat, a phantom pain that flared whenever her stress levels spiked. Through the glass, she watched the surgical team work. 6 people in sterile gowns and masks, their hands moving with practiced precision. The lead surgeon was a major, a trauma specialist who had spent 3 tours putting soldiers back together. He stood at the head of the table, calling out orders in the calm voice of someone who had seen death too many times to be intimidated by it. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Briggs stood beside Jordan, still wearing his tactical vest, his rifle slung across his back. He had not left her side since they landed. Neither had Master Chief Roy Cunningham, who leaned against the wall to Jordan's left, his wounded shoulder bandaged, but his eyes alert. How long has it been, Jordan asked. Her voice was hoarse from shouting commands during the firefight and breathing smoke in the compound ruins. Briggs checked his watch. 4 hours. They are doing everything they can. Jordan pressed her palm against the glass. On the other side, barely visible beneath surgical drapes and monitoring equipment, was the man she had spent her entire life searching for. James Kade, her father, alive against all probability, dying against all her prayers. The surgeon had briefed her before the operation. Multiple fractures, some decades old and healed incorrectly. Severe malnutrition, his body consuming its own muscle mass to survive. Organ damage from years of inadequate medical care. Internal bleeding from the trauma of his escape or rescue, they were not sure which. The list went on, each item a testament to the price James Kade had paid for survival. He should have died years ago, the surgeon had said. Not unkindly, the fact that he is still alive is a miracle. Whether we can keep him that way is another question. Jordan had nodded, unable to speak, and watched them wheel her father into surgery. Now she stood vigil, as she had stood on so many firing lines, waiting for a result she could not control. Captain Kade, a voice said behind her. Jordan turned. It was Agent Carver, the DIA officer who had briefed the team before the mission. He looked tired, his civilian clothes rumpled, his eyes red from too much coffee and too little sleep. He carried a folder stamped with classification markings. I am sorry to interrupt, Carver said, but we need to debrief while events are still fresh. The intelligence you recovered from the compound is significant. Jordan stared at him. Her father was on an operating table fighting for his life, and this bureaucrat wanted to talk about intelligence. Briggs stepped between them, his body language protective. Agent Carver, with respect, now is not the time. Carver held up a hand, placating. I understand, but this cannot wait. We have confirmed identities on the dog tags Captain Kade recovered. 7 American service members, all listed as MIA from operations in Laos between 1971 and 1973. This is the first physical evidence of their fates in 50 years. The families deserve to know. Jordan felt the weight of the metal tags still hanging around her neck, mixed now with her father's tags. 7 names, 7 families who had waited for answers that never came. What do you need from me? She asked. Just your statement, Carver said gently. What you found, where you found it, and confirmation that the tags were in Volkov's possession. Then I will leave you alone. Jordan nodded and followed him to a small conference room down the hall. Briggs came with her, uninvited but unmovable. They sat at a table scarred with coffee rings and the scratched initials of bored soldiers. Carver placed a digital recorder on the table and pressed record. For the record, this is Agent Thomas Carver, Defense Intelligence Agency, conducting a debrief with Captain Jordan Kade, United States Army, regarding materials recovered during Operation Broken Arrow. Captain Kade, please describe in your own words what you found in the compound. Jordan took a breath and began. She described the sprint across the valley, the missile strike, the search through the rubble. She described finding Volkov, the conversation before he died, his claim that James Kade might still be alive. She described the safe, the combination, the contents. When she reached the part about finding her father, her voice broke. She paused, swallowed, and continued. Briggs reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, a gesture of solidarity that gave her the strength to finish. When she was done, Carver stopped the recording and leaned back in his chair. Thank you, Captain. I know this is difficult. He opened the folder he had been carrying and slid several photographs across the table. These are the 7 men whose tags you recovered. They all have families still living, parents, siblings, children who never knew their fathers. You have given them closure. Jordan looked at the photographs. Young men in uniform, most of them younger than she was now. They smiled from faded Kodachrome prints, frozen in a moment before war took them and never gave them back. What about my father? Jordan asked. You had him listed as KIA. His name is on the wall. How did you miss that he was alive? Carver sighed, the weight of institutional failure heavy in his expression. We did not miss it, Captain. We failed him. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the CIA received reports of American POWs still being held in former Soviet facilities. We investigated. We found nothing conclusive. The Russian government denied everything. Without proof, without political will, the search was abandoned. He met her eyes. I am sorry, we should have done more. Jordan wanted to rage at him, to scream that sorry was not enough, that her father had suffered for 50 years because bureaucrats had decided he was not worth the effort. But she was too tired for rage, too numb. What happens now? She asked. Now, Carver said, your father receives the best medical care the United States military can provide. If he survives, he will be debriefed, gently, when he is strong enough. He will receive all back pay and benefits owed to him. His military record will be updated to reflect his status as a returned POW, and he will be awarded the Medal of Honor for his resistance under captivity. Jordan shook her head. He does not want medals. He wants to go home. Then we will make that happen, Carver promised. But first, he has to survive surgery. As if summoned by the words, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Captain Kade, the surgeon wants to see you. Jordan stood so fast her chair fell backward. She ran down the hallway, Briggs and Sledge following close behind. The surgeon was waiting outside the operating room, pulling off his surgical mask. His expression was neutral, professionally controlled. Your father is stable, he said without preamble. We repaired the internal bleeding, set the fractures we could reach, and got fluids and nutrition into him. He is in critical condition, but he is alive. Can I see him? Jordan asked. The surgeon nodded. He is in recovery. He is sedated, but he may be able to hear you. Keep it brief. He needs rest. Jordan pushed through the doors into the recovery area. Her father lay in a hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with electronic life. An IV drip ran into his arm. A ventilator tube had been placed down his throat, breathing for him while his body recovered from the trauma of surgery. He looked impossibly small in the bed, shrunken by malnutrition and age, but his chest rose and fell with mechanical regularity, and the monitor above the bed traced the rhythm of his heartbeat in steady green peaks. Jordan pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. She took her father's hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. His skin was papery thin, the veins standing out like blue rivers beneath the surface. "Dad," she said quietly, "it is me. Jordan, you made it through surgery. The doctor says you are going to be okay." There was no response, just the steady beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of the ventilator. Jordan reached up and touched the dog tags around her neck, her father's and her own intermingled. "I found your tags," she continued. "I am wearing them now. And I found the others too. 7 men. I am going to make sure their families know what happened to them. I am going to make sure they are remembered." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You told me there were others, other prisoners. I promise you, Dad, I am going to find them. I am going to bring them home. I do not care how long it takes." A Kade never quits. The door opened behind her. Briggs stepped in, moving quietly. "Captain, there are people here to see you." Jordan turned. Standing in the hallway were the other members of the team. Torres in a wheelchair, his leg bandaged and elevated. Doc Hayes still in his blood-stained uniform. Coms Rivera holding his helmet in his hands. And Sledge, his arm in a sling but his presence unmistakable. "We wanted to check on the colonel," Sledge said. His voice was softer than Jordan had ever heard it. She stood, making room for them to enter. One by one they filed in and stood around the bed. 7 warriors paying respect to an 8th who had fought a war they could barely imagine. Torres spoke first, his voice young but sincere. "Sir, I do not know if you can hear me, but I wanted to say thank you. Your daughter saved my life today. She is the bravest person I have ever met. You raised a hell of a soldier." Doc Hayes nodded. "Colonel Kade, I am a man of faith. I have prayed over a lot of wounded men. I am going to pray for you, and I believe you are going to make it." Coms Rivera shifted his weight, uncomfortable with emotion but determined to speak. "Sir, my family came to America from El Salvador to escape a war. They taught me that freedom is not free. You paid a price most of us cannot imagine. I will not forget that." Sledge stepped forward last. The big SEAL looked down at the man in the bed, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of history. "Colonel Kade, my granddaddy, flew combat missions when people said he was not good enough because of the color of his skin. He fought anyway. He survived. He taught me that courage is not about never being afraid. It is about being afraid and doing the job anyway. You did the job, sir, for 50 years. You are a credit to the uniform." Briggs was last. He stood at the foot of the bed, his hands clasped in front of him. "Colonel, I have a daughter about Jordan's age. Every time I deploy, I think about what it would do to her if I did not come home. You did not get to come home, but you never stopped being a father. Jordan became who she is because of you, because of the example you set. It is an honor to serve with her, and it would be an honor to shake your hand when you wake up." Jordan listened to them speak and felt something shift inside her chest. For 29 years, she had carried the burden of her father's absence alone. Her mother was gone. She had no siblings, no extended family. It had been just her and a ghost and the weight of unanswered questions. But she was not alone anymore. She had a team, a family forged not in blood, but in fire and shared sacrifice. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you for being here, for fighting with me, for bringing him home." Sledge walked over and placed his massive hand on her shoulder. "Captain, you brought us all home today. We are the ones who should be thanking you." The team stayed for another 10 minutes, then quietly filed out, leaving Jordan alone with her father once more. She sat back down, took his hand, and began to talk. She told him about her mother, about Margaret's refusal to believe he was dead, about her final words in the hospice. She told him about enlisting, about Ranger School, about the deployments. She told him about Syria, about the fire, about the scar. She told him everything she had never been able to say, pouring 29 years of grief and anger and love into the quiet space of the recovery room. And somewhere in the steady beep of the heart monitor, in the rhythm of the ventilator, she found peace. 3 days later, James Kade opened his eyes. Jordan was sitting in the same chair, reading aloud from a book of poetry her mother had loved. She did not notice at first, so focused on the words that she missed the small movement of his hand. Then his fingers tightened around hers. She looked up and met his gaze. His eyes were clear, focused, present. The ventilator tube had been removed the day before, and though his voice was weak, he could speak. "Jordan," he whispered. She leaned close, tears already streaming down her face. "I am here, Dad. I am right here." "Did we win?" he asked. Jordan laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and disbelief. "Yeah, Dad, we won." James Kade smiled, and this time there was no sadness in it, just relief. "Good." He closed his eyes again, exhausted by the effort of speaking. "Tell me about your mother." So Jordan did. She talked until her voice gave out, and then she talked some more. She talked about Margaret's flower garden, about her job as a teacher, about the way she hummed while she cooked. She talked about the funeral, about the flag they had given her, about the promise she had made to never stop looking. James listened, his eyes closed but his grip on her hand steady. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I loved her," he said finally. "Every day, even when I could not remember her face, I loved her." "She loved you too," Jordan replied. "She never gave up on you." "Neither did you." Jordan shook her head. "I am your daughter. Giving up is not in our DNA." James opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the scars, the hard edges, the strength that came from walking through fire and coming out the other side. "You are so much like her," he said, "but you have my stubbornness." Is that a compliment or an apology? Both. They sat together in comfortable silence, father and daughter, finally occupying the same space and time after half a century of separation. The door opened and a nurse entered, checking monitors and making notes on a chart. "Colonel Kade, you are doing remarkably well," she said. "The doctors think you can be moved to Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington within the week. Better facilities for long-term recovery." James nodded, then turned to Jordan. "Will you come with me?" "Every step of the way," Jordan promised. 2 weeks later, Jordan stood at Arlington National Cemetery on a cold morning in October. The leaves on the trees had turned gold and red, a riot of color against the gray sky. The cemetery stretched out in all directions, row after row of white headstones marking the resting places of men and women who had given everything for their country. Jordan walked slowly, her dress uniform crisp and clean, her shoes polished to a mirror shine. Her father walked beside her, leaning heavily on a cane but refusing the wheelchair the doctors had recommended. He wore his own dress uniform, the green beret on his head, his colonel's eagles on his shoulders, his chest covered in ribbons that represented a lifetime of service and sacrifice. They stopped at a grave in Section 60, a newer part of the cemetery reserved for casualties from Iraq and Afghanistan. The headstone was simple white marble engraved with a name, dates, and a brief epitaph. Margaret Ann Kade, beloved wife and mother. She waited. James Kade stood looking down at his wife's grave, his jaw tight, his eyes wet. Jordan stood beside him, her hand on his arm, supporting him both physically and emotionally. "I am sorry, Maggie," James said, his voice breaking. "I am sorry I kept you waiting so long." Jordan felt her own tears start to fall. She had buried her mother 29 years ago, had stood at this same grave and promised to find her father. Now he was here, and the circle was complete. "She knows, Dad," Jordan said gently. "Wherever she is, she knows you came home." James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a wedding ring, simple gold, worn smooth by decades of being turned between nervous fingers. He had kept it through 50 years of captivity, hidden it, protected it, carried it as a talisman against despair. He knelt slowly, painfully, and placed the ring on top of the headstone. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered. "Not for one day, not for 1 hour. I am home now, Maggie. I am finally home." Jordan helped him stand, and together they saluted the grave. A final goodbye, a final promise kept. They turned and walked back toward the parking area where Briggs was waiting with the team. The SEALs had come in their dress uniforms, a show of respect for a warrior they had helped rescue. When James and Jordan approached, all 6 men snapped to attention and saluted. James returned the salute, his hand steady. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "My daughter tells me I owe you my life. I do not have the words to express my gratitude, but I can tell you this. You are the finest soldiers I have ever had the honor to serve alongside." Sledge stepped forward. "Sir, the honor is ours. Your daughter is one of us now. That makes you family." James looked at Jordan, pride evident in his expression. "Then I am a lucky man." The ceremony at the Pentagon happened 3 days later. The Secretary of Defense himself presided, standing in a grand hall beneath portraits of generals and admirals dating back to the Revolutionary War. The room was filled with officers, officials, and press. But in the front row sat the people who mattered most. The families of the 7 men whose dog tags Jordan had recovered. Jordan stood at attention in her dress uniform as the secretary read the citation. She had been awarded the Silver Star for Valor, the nation's 3rd highest decoration for combat heroism. The medal felt heavy as he pinned it to her chest, heavier than the medal should have been. But it was not the medal that mattered, it was what came next. One by one, the families came forward. Jordan handed each of them the dog tags that belonged to their loved ones. A mother who had waited 50 years for news of her son. A sister who had been 6 years old when her brother deployed and never came home. A daughter, Jordan's age, who had never known her father but had never stopped hoping. Each exchange was brief, a handshake, a few words of condolence and closure, but the impact was profound. These families had lived in limbo for half a century, not knowing if their loved ones were alive or dead, unable to grieve, unable to move forward. Now they knew. Now they could bury the tags with honor. Now they could heal. When the last family had received their tags, the secretary called James Kade forward. The old colonel walked slowly to the front of the room, his cane tapping on the marble floor. Colonel James Kade, the secretary began, for extraordinary heroism and resistance under captivity, for refusing to provide aid and comfort to the enemy despite 50 years of imprisonment and torture, for maintaining faith with your country and your comrades, and for embodying the highest traditions of military service, it is my honor to present you with the Medal of Honor. The secretary placed the medal around James's neck. The ribbon was light blue, the medal itself a 5-pointed star. It was the highest award America could give, reserved for those who went above and beyond the call of duty. The room erupted in applause. Officers stood, families wept, and Jordan, standing at attention in the front row, felt her heart swell with pride. When the ceremony ended, James found her in the crowd. He took her hand and led her outside, away from the press and officials, to a quiet spot beneath an oak tree. This medal, he said, looking down at the star on his chest, belongs to you as much as it does to me. Jordan shook her head. You earned that. 50 years of hell, and you never broke. I did not break because I had something to hold on to, James replied. I had the memory of your mother, and I had the hope that someday, somehow, I would meet my daughter. That hope kept me alive. You kept me alive. Jordan embraced him, careful of his still healing injuries. What are you going to do now? She asked. James pulled back and looked at her. I am going to rest, I am going to heal, and I am going to spend whatever time I have left getting to know my daughter. He paused, his expression turning serious. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. There are others, men I saw in those prisons. Americans. I do not know if they are still alive, but if there is even a chance, someone needs to go looking. He gripped her shoulders. I am too old, too broken. But you are not. Promise me you will not stop looking. Promise me you will bring them home. Jordan looked into her father's eyes and saw the same determination that had kept him alive through 5 decades of captivity. The same refusal to quit that ran in her blood. I promise, she said, I will find them. I will bring them home. 6 months later, Captain Jordan Kade stood in a classroom at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California. The Pacific Ocean stretched out beyond the windows, sunlight glittering on the waves. 20 SEAL candidates sat at desks, their attention focused on her every word. Briggs had offered her a position as an instructor, a chance to pass on what she had learned to the next generation of operators. Jordan had accepted, not because she was done fighting, but because she understood that the mission was bigger than any one person. The fundamentals of long-range marksmanship, she said, walking along the front of the classroom, are breath control, trigger discipline, and mental focus. But the most important factor is something you cannot train in a classroom. It is the will to complete the mission, no matter the cost. She paused at the front of the room and touched the dog tags around her neck. 2 sets now, her own and her father's. I am going to tell you a story, she said, about a soldier who refused to quit, about a team that refused to leave anyone behind, and about why we do what we do. The class leaned forward, listening. Jordan began to speak, and as she did, she felt the weight she had carried for so long begin to lift. She was not running anymore, not from the fire, not from the past, not from the responsibility of honoring those who could not speak for themselves. She was home, and she was ready for whatever came next. Because a Kade never quits. That evening, Jordan drove to a small house in the hills outside San Diego. It was a modest place, single story, with a garden in the front and a view of the ocean from the back deck. Her father had bought it with the back pay the Army had given him, 50 years of salary compounded with interest. She found him sitting on the deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. He looked healthier than he had 6 months ago, the weight slowly returning to his frame, the color coming back to his face. Jordan sat down beside him and handed him a beer. "How was class?" James asked. "Good. I think I am getting the hang of teaching. You were always good at leading. Teaching is just another form of leadership." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "I got a call today," Jordan said, "from the DIA. They have a lead on one of the facilities you mentioned, a prison in Kazakhstan. They think there might be American detainees there." James turned to look at her. "Are you going?" "Not yet. They are still gathering intelligence. But when they are ready, yes, I am going." James nodded slowly. "Be careful. And remember, you do not have to do this alone." "I know," Jordan said. "I have a team, and I have you." James reached over and took her hand. "You have always had me, Jordan. Even when I was not there, you had me. And your mother. We were with you every step." Jordan squeezed his hand, feeling the strength that still remained in those old bones. "I know, Dad. I know." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving the sky awash in the deep blue of twilight. Somewhere in the house, a phone rang. Somewhere in the world, men were still missing, still waiting for someone to remember them. But for now, in this moment, Jordan Kade was at peace. She had run through fire and come out the other side. She had found her father and brought him home. She had honored the dead and promised to save the living. The mission was not over. It would never truly be over. But that was okay, because a Kade never quits, and Jordan Kade was just getting started. The end.